finished, that was your last jump.
That was my last jump. Let me tell you that story. I got back to Cave Junction from that jump, and I was already AWOL. I'd been called back in the Army because of the Korean War. And so R.J. Corson, Dick Corson, who I mentioned earlier, who became a judge later, many years later, wrote a letter on Forest Service letterhead explaining to the Army why I was going to be late. He made a big story out of this thing. Being a typical lawyer, he was really good at writing up bullshit. I basically saved the entire forest with my jump, which of course wasn't true. And so, at any rate, Terry,
Yeah.
would you let Baby Boo out?
Yeah.
And he explained to them why I was AWOL. So when I came back, at that time, Fort Ord was still in existence. Now it's a state park in California, but that was my reporting place. So when I reported into Cave Junction, I was 3 days AWOL. And I handed this letter to this first sergeant who was running a Sula mill, and he took the letter, and I guess he decided that I wasn't worth court-martialing because I never heard the last of that. Never, not once did I ever hear anything from the Army again. And so I spent the next couple of years back in the Army.
What were you doing in the Army then?
They used me as a writer, a staff writer in Army Public Relations. I'd had a couple of years at the university by that time, and so supposedly I knew how to write. And so I spent the next couple of years as a writer in the Army.
Good. And so when did you get out of the Army?
They released us quite early. In the end of 1951, the beginning of 1952, the war lasted, as you know, until 1953, the fall of 53. But since we were reservists, and that's what I was the second time, excuse me, they let us out early, before the draftees got out and the people in the regular Army got out.
So did you head back up to the University of Washington?
Yep, went back to school again. Ultimately graduated from there.
And then what'd you do? Would you become a teacher or a forester, or what'd you become?
Well, my intent was to go to graduate school, but I'd gotten married, and my wife and I had 4 kids before we figured out what it was we were doing wrong. And so there wasn't any money to go to graduate school.
Yeah.
I went to undergraduate school, of course, on the GI Bill. So I had to get a job. That's how come I went to work for Boeing. I spent the next 35 years there.
Okay. So that was up in Seattle, so you spent your whole time up there, and did you...
Oh no, Boeing transferred me all over the country.
I see.
And even in Europe. And so I spent the 35 years, which is typical at Boeing, all over the place. Many, many different places.
Did you ever run into any people who had been smoke jumpers during that time?
No, I don't think I did, unfortunately. Which is really too bad. It was after I got back from all those years at Boeing that I discovered by accident, and I can thank my wife for that because she's a computer guru. And she hooked me up with the website of the Smokejumpers at Missoula. And I called him up and I talked to a gentleman, real well-known guy, Degenerate.
Don't know him.
Really well-known guy. I'd have to go get a copy of one of the Smokejumper magazines to find his name. But fortunately, he's the one who answered the phone. And I know that when I say Degenerate, I'm pronouncing the name correctly. You could ask Chuck Shelley. You could tell him he could tell you how to pronounce his name correctly. At any rate, he interviewed me and got me oriented into Smokejumpers. And at that time then, I got the magazine and paid my dues. And that was when, I don't know, must have been after 1990, because I didn't retire till 1990.
And so the whole time since you got home from the Army, you worked for Boeing.
Uh-huh.
You kind of did your writing stuff for them.
Yeah.
But you didn't go back into teaching or anything like that?
No, I wasn't qualified. I only had an undergraduate degree.
I see. Okay,
Because
cool.
as I mentioned, I didn't have the money to go to graduate school.
Well, I was talking to some former jumpers over in Arizona, and their experience has been that they can spot a jumper a mile away, that there's something that's been imbued into people from the experience. And I don't know. I don't know if it's just a personal opinion, but do you have any thoughts on what you got out of it, or what it gave to people having that experience?
Well, over the years, I have read many magazines that have been written through Chuck Shelley. In fact, I've got them all in my office. I have an office full of hundreds of books. Mm-hmm. And up above all my books, I've got the shelves with all of the Smokejumper magazines since I got acquainted with the organization after 1990, all of which were produced by Chuck Shelley and his organization. And there's been a lot written about the very subject you just brought up. But I can't say that I am familiar with that. I don't know any jumpers because we moved away from Seattle after I retired to Las Cruces. And it was because of the work that you gentlemen have been doing the last few weeks that I've been familiar with the fact that there are other smoke jumpers that live in Las Cruces.
Yeah.
And it's a city of 100,000 now, so it's not surprising. But I think there are half a dozen of us. Mm-hmm. I don't know any of them. And there are, of course, a larger group in Texas, because there are far more people there than there are here. But I don't know any smoke jumpers.
Well, I find it interesting too, but it turns out there's 80 in New Mexico and 57 in Texas.
I read in your publications that there were 80. And I would be surprised, or am surprised as a matter of fact, that there are of us even here, because the parts of New Mexico that would appeal to smoke jumpers are in the north central part.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'll admit that I miss the woods. I miss the woods a lot. I like New Mexico because I got away from that damn rain in Seattle, which is why we're here, partly. And partly because there are Boeing people who were involved with the work that's being done just over the hill from here at White Sands.
Oh, I see, yeah.
And in fact, Boeing has had a number of projects at White Sands. And that's basically how we got here, is through Boeing people.
Well, back on that original question, so you've had this solo experience after you left jumping, going through your life. Do you think you came with all the traits that you needed after you left Wyoming, and did you gain anything while you were jumping? I mean, was it just another experience in a long list of experiences, or was there something special that you came away with?
Well, I think as we read in the magazine that Shelley publishes, it is unique. There's no question about that. When you make your first jump, there's two thoughts in your mind. The first thing is, I'm scared shitless and I don't want to jump. And secondly, I damn sure will, because I don't want any of these other guys to see me chicken out. It's just that simple, and that is what establishes the uniqueness. And of course, the big bosses all know that. As I mentioned before, our boss was a former 82nd Airborne man. And a lot of people don't realize this. The smoke jumpers taught the 82nd how to jump. It wasn't the other way around.
Well, what was the story on that? I've heard different things, but what's your understanding?
In the magazine that Shelley has written, the story is told at one point, but we don't have time to look that up now. But basically what happened, and I got to be careful because I might get my facts a little mixed up. But in the summer of 1939, when we made our first jumps, we, the organization, the 82nd Infantry said, hey, wait a minute, we got to think about this a little bit. The German army had already established parachute jumping. And, we're not stupid. So the 82nd Infantry sent a bunch of officers, or not a bunch, but a group of officers, up to Missoula. It says, hey, show us how this is done. And this Missoula Smokejumpers did. And that's how the 82nd Airborne was born. They went back to Fort Benning, where the 82nd Infantry was stationed, and they formed the 82nd Airborne. And out of that, the 101st Airborne was born. And out of that, the Airborne Division that I was a part of in 9th Corps in Japan, I was in the 1st Cavalry Division, 11th Airborne grew out of that. Okay, and the 11th Airborne was a Pacific War organization, so it's not as well known as the 82nd and 101st, which jumped in Europe. But at any rate, those organizations were all grown out of the summer that the 82nd spent with the Smokejumpers at Missoula.
That's really good. Now, the boss that you had running Cave Junction when you got there that had the 4 combat jumps,
Yeah.
did he learn to be a smoke jumper before he became an airborne trooper, or how'd
No.
that work? What was the story there?
No, in his group, he had gone into the 82nd long before he knew about the group at the 82nd, the Smokejumpers at Missoula. I don't remember Cliff's personal background. He may have been an Easterner for all I know. But that's probably not true. He's probably from the West. But he went to the Smokejumpers at Cave Junction after the war was over, just as Bob Nolan did, just as R.J. Corson did, because they found out about the Smokejumpers from their military. And so those gentlemen all gravitated to Missoula as when they got out of the military after the war was over.
That's great. Is there anything else you think's important for people to know about from your experience?
No, I don't think I can remember anything. I've already talked too much, John.
No, you haven't. I really appreciate it. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.